Richard Blake stepped out of the sleek black car, the door swinging shut with a soft thud behind him. He adjusted his tailored suit, the fabric hugging his athletic frame perfectly, and took a moment to absorb the opulence of the five-star hotel that loomed before him. The grand entrance was adorned with gleaming marble floors and extravagant chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, casting a warm glow over the bustling lobby. As the CEO of a successful tech company, Richard was no stranger to luxury, but the extravagance of this place still managed to impress him. His colleagues, a group of sharply dressed men and women, were already gathering around the reception desk, exchanging laughter and compliments. They admired Richard's reputation, and he thrived on their attention. With a charming smile, he approached them, exuding an air of confidence that was hard to overlook. "Looks like we're in for quite the retreat," he said with a hint of arrogance, his voice smooth and commanding. "Only the best for us, right?" One of his colleagues, Lisa, replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I can't wait for the team-building activities. I hear they're going to be epic." Richard nodded, engrossed in the adoration of his peers. He loved being the center of attention, basking in the accolades and the validation that came with his status. Yet, beneath the surface of his charisma, a flicker of emptiness lingered. He often wondered if his achievements meant anything beyond the walls of his high-rise office. As the group made their way to the elevators, Richard caught sight of a woman in a crisp uniform pushing a cart loaded with fresh towels and cleaning supplies. Sarah Mitchell, the hotel maid, moved with a quiet determination, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. She focused intently on her task, unaware of the world of wealth swirling around her. Richard briefly locked eyes with her, and for a split second, something compelled him to linger. There was a sense of humility in her demeanor that contrasted sharply with the ostentation of the hotel's clientele. "Hey, Richard, Earth to Richard," a voice snapped him back to reality. It was Tom, a fellow executive, waving his hand in front of Richard's face. "You with us?" "Yeah, just, admiring the view," Richard replied, shaking his head slightly as he turned away from Sarah. He joined his colleagues in the elevator, but the image of the maid stayed with him, like a whisper of an uncharted path. Meanwhile, in the depths of the hotel, Sarah was fully immersed in her work. She moved through the corridors with grace, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. Every day she put in long hours to support her two younger siblings and her ailing mother. The hotel was her lifeline, a place where she could earn enough to keep her family afloat. As she entered the luxurious suite of Richard Blake, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. The suite was a testament to wealth, with plush furnishings, an expansive view of the city skyline, and a hint of extravagance in every detail. Sarah began her work methodically, cleaning surfaces and arranging the room with care. Yet, as she dusted the ornate bedside table, her eyes caught a glimpse of something unusual, a sleek, black object glimmering under the light. It was a small, intricately designed phone case, distinctly different from the ones she had seen before. Curiosity piqued. She picked it up to examine it closer. "Wow, this is nice," she muttered to herself, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Her mind raced with thoughts of the man who owned it. What was Richard Blake like outside of this lavish setting? Did he ever think about the people who served him? Just then, a noise startled her from her reverie. She dropped the case back onto the table, her heart racing. She quickly resumed her cleaning, trying to shake off the intrusion of her own curiosity. She had no right to wonder about him. After all, he was a world away from her reality. As she finished tidying up the suite, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of longing. The life of luxury was a distant dream for her, one that felt almost unattainable. Yet, a part of her wondered what it would be like to escape her daily grind, even if just for a moment. Later that afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, Richard returned to his suite after a long day of meetings. He was still buzzing with the adrenaline of success, his mind racing with ideas and strategies. The moment he stepped inside, however, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. His phone case was missing. Puzzled, he searched the room, wondering if he had misplaced it during his busy day. As he stood there, still lost in thought, he heard a soft knock at the door, It was followed by the gentle voice of Sarah. "Excuse me, Mr. Blake. I came to check if you needed anything." Richard opened the door, surprised to see her standing there, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Yes, just a moment, please." He glanced around the room, trying to recall where he had last seen the case. "I seem to have misplaced something, a black phone case. Have you seen it?" Sarah felt her heart race at the realization that he was speaking to her directly. "I'm sorry, sir. I haven't seen it," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "But I can help you look for it if you'd like." Richard regarded her for a moment, intrigued by her willingness to assist. "That would be great, actually. I'm not entirely sure where I could have left it." He stepped aside, allowing her to enter the suite. As they began to search, Richard couldn't help but notice the attention to detail with which Sarah approached her work. She moved with purpose, her focus unwavering, and he found himself captivated by her quiet strength. "You do a great job here," he remarked, breaking the silence. "I've seen you in the corridors. You really keep this place running smoothly." "Thank you," Sarah said, a hint of pride creeping into her tone. "I just try to do my best. It's important to me." She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I want to make sure our guests feel comfortable." Richard nodded, impressed by her dedication. "It shows. It's rare to find someone so committed to their work." He felt a strange connection forming, as if their worlds were beginning to overlap in ways he had never considered. "Oh, here it is," Sarah exclaimed, spotting the phone case wedged between the couch cushions. She retrieved it and held it out to him, a small smile breaking through her initial shyness. "Thank you," he said, taking the case from her hands. Their fingers brushed for a brief moment, sending an unexpected spark between them. Richard looked into her eyes, sensing an unspoken understanding that neither of them could quite articulate. "Is there anything else you need?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, unsure of how to navigate this unexpected connection. "No, that's all for now," Richard replied, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "But it was nice talking to you." He hesitated, as if contemplating whether to say more. "I hope to see you around." "Yeah, me too," she said, her heart racing as she stepped back toward the door. "Have a good evening, Mr. Blake." As she left the suite, Sarah felt a swirl of emotions. She was just a maid, and he was a powerful CEO. The encounter had been brief, yet it lingered in her mind, fueling dreams of a life she had never dared to imagine. Meanwhile, Richard closed the door behind her, still caught in the moment. The world outside his corporate bubble suddenly felt a little more vibrant, a little more alive. As the days passed, Richard Blake found himself increasingly captivated by Sarah Mitchell. He observed her during his stay at the luxurious hotel, where the opulences seemed to emphasize the humility of her presence. Each morning, as he descended to the lobby for breakfast, he would catch glimpses of her diligently working, her hands deftly smoothing the linens, or her smile brightening the faces of weary guests. There was an authenticity about her that stood in stark contrast to the superficiality of his colleagues, who flitted from one conversation to another, their laughter echoing hollowly around them. "Have you seen the new tech we're rolling out?" one of his colleagues boasted one morning, oblivious to the world around him. Richard offered a non-committal nod, his eyes drifting back to Sarah, who was now assisting an elderly guest with her suitcase. The way Sarah treated people, with genuine kindness and respect, stirred something in Richard that he had long thought buried beneath layers of corporate ambition and social expectations. During one of these breakfasts, Richard found himself seated at a table near the expansive windows overlooking the city. He could see Sarah moving gracefully in and out of the dining area, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her uniform crisp and polished. "She's quite efficient, isn't she?" one of his colleagues commented, noticing Richard's lingering gaze. "Yeah, she is," Richard replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't want to reveal how deeply her work ethic resonated with him. It was a strange feeling, one that left him both intrigued and uncomfortable. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every interaction. But with Sarah, he felt like a spectator, drawn into a world he had never considered. Later that day, while Richard was attending a strategy meeting, he found himself distracted by thoughts of Sarah. The conference room was filled with charts and graphs outlining the company's next big venture, but all he could think about was her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke to the guests and how she appeared to be in her own world, blissfully unaware of the wealth and privilege that surrounded her. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard lingered, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah before heading back to his room. He stepped out into the hallway where the faint sound of laughter drew him closer to the staff area. He leaned against the wall, listening as Sarah conversed with a fellow maid. "Did you see the way that gentleman tipped yesterday?" Sarah said, her voice light and melodic. "I thought I was dreaming." "I know. It's not every day you see someone so generous," her colleague replied. "But you deserve it, Sarah. You give your all to everyone." Richard's heart swelled as he listened. He could feel the warmth of her spirit radiating through the walls, and he couldn't help but smile at the thought of how she lit up the mundane routines of the hotel. Suddenly, the door to the staff area swung open, and Sarah stepped out, holding a tray laden with freshly baked pastries. "Excuse me," she exclaimed, startled to see Richard standing there. "I didn't see you." "No worries," he said, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. "I was just passing by." She smiled, and for a moment, the world around them faded. "Are you enjoying your stay so far?" "It's been great," he replied, his eyes locking onto hers. "But I think it just got a whole lot better." Before he could second-guess himself, Richard took a step closer. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner one night. I'd love to hear more about your life here." Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to apprehension. "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, I work here and you're—" "Just a guy who appreciates hard work and kindness," he interrupted, hoping to ease her worries. "You have a unique perspective on things, and I'd like to hear it. What do you say?" She hesitated, biting her lip as she weighed the implications of his invitation. "I'm not sure if that's appropriate, Mr. Blake." "Richard," he corrected gently. "Please, just call me Richard." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and Richard could see the battle within her. "Okay, Richard," she said finally, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "I suppose I could spare some time." "Great. How about tomorrow night?" he suggested, feeling a rush of exhilaration. "Tomorrow works," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But—" "No buts," Richard said, grinning. "I promise to keep it casual, just you and me." As they exchanged pleasantries, Richard felt a surge of anticipation. He had never felt this way about anyone before, and the thought of spending time with Sarah ignited a sense of hope he hadn't realized he was missing. The next afternoon, as Sarah cleaned one of the luxury suites, she found herself distracted by thoughts of Richard. She had overheard snippets of his conversations with his team, discussing ambitious plans for a new product launch. His drive and passion intrigued her, even as she fought against feelings of inadequacy. Why would someone like him be interested in her? She was just a maid, a cog in the vast machine of the hotel. "Sarah, are you daydreaming again?" her colleague teased as she entered the room with a cart full of linens. "No, of course not," Sarah replied hastily, shaking her head. "I was just thinking about that handsome businessman." Her colleague waggled her eyebrows playfully. "I just don't understand why he would want to spend time with me," Sarah admitted, her heart heavy with self-doubt. "I'm just a maid." "Just a maid, don't sell yourself short," her colleague replied firmly. "You have so much to offer. Besides, he's not like the others. You can see it in his eyes." As the evening approached, Sarah readied herself for dinner with Richard, her stomach a mix of excitement and anxiety. She chose a simple but elegant dress, one that made her feel confident yet comfortable. As she glanced in the mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a different world, one that felt both thrilling and intimidating. Arriving at the hotel's elegant dining area, Sarah spotted Richard at a table near the window, his expression brightening as he caught sight of her. He stood to greet her, his tailored suit accentuating his stature, and for a moment Sarah felt like a princess stepping into a fairy tale. "Wow, you look incredible," Richard said, his eyes sparkling with genuine admiration. "Thank you," Sarah replied, her cheeks warming. "I could say the same about you." They settled into conversation, and Richard shared stories about his career and the challenges he faced as a CEO. Sarah spoke of her dreams and the sacrifices she made for her family, revealing a side of herself that she rarely shared with anyone. With each word exchanged, the invisible divide between their worlds began to close. However, as the evening progressed, Sarah could feel the weight of their differences pressing down on her. Her self-doubt crept in, whispering that she didn't belong in this world of luxury and privilege. She watched as other guests entered the dining room, their laughter and chatter creating an atmosphere of celebration that felt foreign to her. "Do you want to dance?" Richard asked suddenly, rising from his chair and extending his hand toward her. "Dance?" Sarah echoed, her heart racing. "Here, with all these people?" "Why not?" he replied, his smile infectious. "Just a dance, Sarah. I promise it'll be fun." Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand in his, feeling an electric thrill shoot through her. He led her to the small dance floor, where soft music filled the air. As they swayed together, Richard's presence enveloped her, and for a moment she forgot about everything else, the judgment, the expectations, the glaring social divide. But as they danced, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. She caught the eyes of Richard's colleagues, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. Whispers floated through the air, and Sarah's heart sank. What were they thinking? This was Richard's world, and she was an intruder. "Are you okay?" Richard asked, noticing her sudden tension. I think I need some air," she stammered, the weight of her insecurities crashing down around her. "Sarah, wait!" He reached for her, but she gently pulled away, her heart pounding as she stepped off the dance floor. She hurried outside to the terrace, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Richard followed closely behind, concern etched on his face. "What happened? Did I do something wrong?" "No, it's not you," she replied, her voice trembling. "It's just everything. I feel like I don't belong here." Richard stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Sarah. Don't let anyone else's opinion define you." "But this is your world, and I'm just a maid," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I'm not equipped for this." "Neither am I," he said earnestly, reaching for her hand. "I'm just a man who admires your spirit and wants to know you better. Don't let their judgments cloud what we have." His words hung in the air between them, a promise and a plea, but the tension in Sarah's chest remained. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of societal expectations loomed large, threatening to pull them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the expansive windows of the five-star hotel, Richard Blake found himself seated at a discreet table in the hotel's lavish bar. It was a quiet evening, and the usual bustle of corporate gatherings had subsided. He absently stirred a glass of whiskey, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of Sarah Mitchell. It had been a week since their first clandestine meeting, and he felt an undeniable pull towards her, something he hadn't experienced in years. In stark contrast to his polished surroundings, Sarah was in a small break room, clad in her maid uniform, her heart racing as she prepared for another shift. The other staff members were whispering about Richard, whispers that echoed with disbelief and envy. "Did you see him at the gala?" one of her co-workers said, her tone laced with admiration. "He's like a movie star." Sarah smiled faintly, her mind drifting back to that dance, their bodies moving in a rhythm that felt both foreign and exhilarating. She thought of how Richard had looked at her, as if she were more than just a maid. It was intoxicating, yet terrifying. What would her friends think? What would her family say? That evening, Sarah's phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was a text from Richard, his words simple yet charged with warmth. "Can we meet tonight? I need to see you." She felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. Glancing around the break room, she took a deep breath and nodded to herself. She couldn't let fear dictate her feelings any longer. Later, at a secluded spot in the hotel's garden, illuminated by soft fairy lights, Richard paced nervously, his heart racing as he waited for Sarah. He had chosen this spot deliberately, away from prying eyes, where they could share their dreams without the weight of societal expectations. When he finally saw her approaching, he felt a surge of relief and joy. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice low and earnest as she stepped into the light, her presence grounding him. "I'm so glad you came." "Hi, Richard," she replied, her voice soft but steady. The tension in the air was palpable, charged with unspoken words and emotions. "What did you want to talk about?" "I wanted to know more about you," he said, gesturing for her to sit on the bench beside him. "Not just the woman I see at work, but the real you. What do you dream about?" Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding. "I dream about a lot of things," she admitted, looking away. "But it feels silly to talk about them." "Nothing is silly if it's important to you," he insisted, leaning closer. "I want to understand you, to know what drives you." She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of vulnerability and exhilaration. "I want to travel," she confessed. "I want to see the world beyond this hotel, beyond this town. I want to experience life, not just survive it." Richard's eyes lit up with admiration. "You deserve that and so much more. What's stopping you?" "Money mostly," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I work hard just to make ends meet. My family relies on me. I can't just abandon them to chase a dream." His expression shifted to one of understanding. "I know what it's like to feel trapped by expectations, but I don't think you should give up on yourself. You're capable of so much, Sarah." She looked into his eyes, searching for sincerity. "And what about you? What do you dream of?" He chuckled softly, a hint of sadness in his voice. "I dream of being more than just a successful businessman. I want to make a difference, but sometimes I feel like I'm just a pawn in a corporate game. It's lonely at the top." As they shared their aspirations, the barriers between their worlds began to dissolve. Laughter bubbled up between them, and for a moment they were simply two souls connecting under the stars. But as the night wore on, reality crept back in. "Richard," Sarah said, her voice suddenly serious, "what will your friends think of this?" "Us? I mean, I'm just a maid. You're a CEO. It feels like a bad idea." His expression hardened slightly, but he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't care what they think. What matters is how I feel about you. You're not just a maid to me, Sarah. You're so much more." "But what if they judge you? What if it affects your reputation?" she pressed, her brow furrowed in concern. Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've spent my life worrying about what others think. I'm tired of it. I want to be with you, and I'm willing to face that judgment." Sarah felt her heart race. The intensity of his gaze made her feel seen, but doubt still lingered. "I just don't want to drag you down. You have so much to lose." "Maybe you don't see it, but being with you is what I want. It makes me happier than anything else ever has," he replied earnestly. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted their moment. "Richard, there you are!" It was Claire, his polished ex-girlfriend, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Richard's expression shifted to one of frustration. "Claire, this isn't a good time," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "Oh, but I think it is," she replied, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Sarah. "I didn't realize you were entertaining someone down here. Such quaint taste, Richard." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The tension in the air thickened as Claire's words hung between them, sharp and cutting. Richard's grip on Sarah's hand tightened, but the damage had been done. "Claire, please, this is not—" Richard began, but Claire interrupted him. "Not what? Not appropriate, but look at her," she said, waving a dismissive hand towards Sarah. "You've gone from the top tier to this." "Enough," Richard snapped, his voice rising. You don't get to speak to her like that. Sarah is incredible, and I won't let you belittle her." Claire smirked, unfazed by his anger. "You really think this is going to last? What do you see in her? She's not your type, Richard." Sarah's heart raced, a mix of humiliation and anger bubbling inside her. "I think it's time for me to go," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. She stood up, pulling her hand away from Richard's. "I can't be part of this." "Sarah, wait!" Richard called, standing up as well, but she was already walking away, the weight of Claire's words echoing in her mind. "Goodbye, Richard," she said without turning back, her heart aching with each step she took away from him. She felt small and insignificant, the confidence they had built together slowly crumbling under Claire's taunts. Richard stood frozen, watching her disappear into the shadows of the garden, a storm of emotions swirling within him. He turned back to Claire, fury and frustration etched across his face. "You've crossed a line," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Please, Richard," Claire said with a playful smile. "I was just pointing out the truth. You're a successful man, and you can do so much better." "Get out of my sight," Richard growled, his patience wearing thin. "I won't let you ruin something special to me. If you're here to sow discord, you can leave." With that, he strode into the hotel, determination fueling his every step. He had to find Sarah, to make her see that Claire's words were nothing but jealousy. As he searched the corridors, he felt a sense of urgency. He couldn't let her slip away from him, not now, not when he had finally found someone who made him feel alive again. But as Sarah walked away, tears prickling her eyes, she felt the very heart of her dreams faltering. She had entered Richard's world, only to be met with judgment and ridicule. Would she ever truly belong in a place where wealth and status overshadowed the truth of who she was? The question lingered, heavy and unresolved, as she stepped into the night, the distant glow of the hotel fading behind her. Richard Blake stood in the dimly lit restaurant, his heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. The soft glow of candlelight flickered against the elegant table settings, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He had meticulously planned this surprise dinner for Sarah, hoping to bridge the widening gap that had formed between them. But as the minutes ticked by, his excitement morphed into unease. He checked his watch again, the weight of its gold band pressing against his wrist. Why was she late? He had texted her earlier, asking her to meet him here, a charming little bistro tucked away from the bustling hotel. He had envisioned their evening filled with laughter, deep conversations, and perhaps a rekindling of the spark that had drawn them together. But as he glanced at the empty chair across from him, a knot formed in his stomach. The restaurant was buzzing with the chatter of diners, the clinking of silverware, and the soft melodies of a live pianist. Yet, all of it felt muted to Richard. His mind wandered back to the last time they had spoken, when Sarah had started to pull away. Her laughter, once so bright and infectious, had dimmed, replaced by a hesitant silence. She had begun avoiding him, and he couldn't understand why. His frustration had grown, mingling with confusion and concern. As he sat there, he replayed their conversations in his mind. "Richard, you live in a world that I just don't belong to," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, had held a glimmer of fear. She felt inadequate, he realized, burdened by the weight of his wealth and status. Richard fought against the urge to call her, to demand she explain her absence. Instead, he took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. Just as he was about to signal for the waiter, his phone buzzed on the table. He snatched it up, his heart racing with hope, only to find a message from Sarah. "I'm sorry, Richard. I can't make it tonight." His heart sank. "Why not?" he typed back, quickly hitting send. But a part of him already knew the answer. She was slipping away, believing that their worlds were incompatible. He could feel the frustration bubbling inside him, but it mingled with a deep sense of sadness. The waiter approached, a polite smile on his face. "Sir, would you like to order?" Richard forced a smile, shaking his head. "I'll wait a little longer." After several more minutes, Richard's patience wore thin. He pushed his chair back, the sound echoing in the quiet restaurant. It was clear that Sarah had made up her mind, and he couldn't force her to change it. As he stood to leave, he felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. He had hoped this evening would mark a turning point for them, but instead it felt like a final nail in the coffin of their relationship. Outside, the cool night air hit him, sharp and refreshing, but it did little to quell the heat of his frustration. He walked through the streets, the lights of the city twinkling around him, but they seemed distant and unwelcoming. Richard's mind raced with thoughts of Sarah, of her laughter and her dreams, and of the way she had looked at him with both admiration and fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed her, even though he had tried so hard to show her that love could transcend their differences. After wandering aimlessly for what felt like hours, Richard found himself outside a small cafe. The warm glow from within beckoned him, and he stepped inside, seeking solace in a cup of coffee. As he settled into a corner booth, he pulled out his phone again, staring at the screen, longing for a message from Sarah that would explain everything. But nothing came. In that moment of solitude, Richard's mind drifted to his colleague, Mark, who had always been there to offer advice. Mark was the kind of friend who could see through the facades people put up, and Richard knew he could use some perspective. He sent a quick text asking Mark to meet him. Within minutes, Mark arrived, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You look like you've just lost a battle, Richard. What's going on?" Richard sighed, leaning back in the booth. "It's Sarah. I planned a dinner for us, but she didn't show up. I feel like she's pulling away, and I don't know how to reach her." Mark took a seat across from him, leaning forward, interest piqued. "What do you mean? Has something happened? I thought we were good. We shared so much, but lately, it's like she's convinced that we don't belong together. She said she feels out of place in my world." Richard's frustration bubbled to the surface. "I don't understand how she can think that way. I care about her, and I thought she felt the same." "What do you want, Richard?" Mark asked, his tone serious. "Do you want to break through that wall she's built around herself? Because if that's the case, you need to show her you're serious. You can't just wait for her to come to you." Richard nodded, his mind racing. "I know, but how do I do that? Every time I try to get closer, it seems to push her further away. I don't want to lose her, but I can't keep chasing after someone who thinks they don't belong with me." "Have you told her how you really feel?" Mark pressed, his eyes searching Richard's. "Sometimes vulnerability is what it takes to break down those barriers. Let her see that you're scared too, that this isn't just some fling for you." Richard pondered Mark's words. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having the answers, but this was different. His feelings for Sarah were deeper than he had anticipated, and admitting his vulnerabilities felt terrifying. "I guess I've been so focused on trying to prove to her that we're compatible, that I forgot to show her how much she means to me," Richard admitted, rubbing a hand over his face in frustration. "I'm used to being the one in charge, but with her, it's like I'm lost." "Then maybe you need to be honest," Mark replied, a reassuring smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Show her that you're willing to fight for this, that you're not just some wealthy CEO with a trophy girlfriend. You need to show her you're just a guy in love." Richard's heart raced at the thought. "You're right, I can't let this end without fighting for her." With newfound determination, Richard finished his coffee and thanked Mark for his insight. As he stepped back onto the bustling street, he felt a surge of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to confront his fears and reach out to Sarah one more time. He would show her that love was worth fighting for, even against the odds that sought to keep them apart. The city lights twinkled above him, a reflection of the possibility that lay ahead. Richard Blake was ready to embrace vulnerability, to take a leap of faith, and to fight for the woman who had stolen his heart. Richard stood outside the hotel room, heart pounding in his chest, as he prepared to confront Sarah. The lavish surroundings of the five-star hotel felt suffocating, the golden chandeliers and plush carpets contrasting sharply with the turmoil in his mind. He had come to realize that the distance Sarah had placed between them was tearing him apart. It was time to break down those walls and speak his truth. Taking a deep breath, he knocked softly on the door, his mind racing with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Sarah, her hair slightly disheveled and her eyes shadowed with uncertainty. The sight of her made his heart skip a beat. She looked beautiful, even in her simple maid's uniform, but there was a fragility about her that made him ache. "Richard," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in, though her voice was laced with hesitation. "Sarah," he replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room was small and modest, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them in the hotel. "I need to talk to you." She nodded, folding her arms protectively across her chest as if to shield herself from his words. "I think I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" He took a step closer, his gaze locked onto hers, searching for a glimmer of hope in the depths of her soulful brown eyes. "I can't stand the way things have been between us. I miss you, Sarah. I miss us."
Not.
Her breath hitched and he could see the struggle within her. "Richard, it's not that simple. You have your world and I have mine. They don't mesh. People are talking and I don't want to be the reason for your trouble." "Let them talk," he exclaimed, frustration spilling over. "I care about you, not what they say. You're worth more than their opinions. You have to trust me." "Trust you?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "How can I do that when I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff? You're a CEO, for heaven's sake, and I'm just a maid. I don't belong in your world." "Sarah, you belong wherever you want to be. I want you by my side. This isn't about status. It's about us." He stepped closer, the intensity between them palpable, as he reached out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to build a life with you, but I can't do that if you keep pushing me away." Tears glistened in her eyes and he felt his heart break for her. "But what about Claire? She's not going to let this go. She'll do everything she can to make my life miserable. I can't be in a relationship where I'm always looking over my shoulder." "Claire does not control my life," Richard insisted, anger flashing in his eyes. "I'm not going to let her dictate who I can and cannot be with. This is our life, Sarah, not hers." "I don't want to be a burden to you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but he could feel the weight of her words. "You're not a burden," he replied fiercely, stepping even closer, until there was barely any space between them. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. I need you in my life. I love you." The admission hung in the air, heavy and transformative. Richard watched as Sarah's expression shifted, uncertainty battling with the flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "You love me?" she repeated, a breathless wonder escaping her lips. "Yes," he said, his voice firm yet tender. "I love you, Sarah. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She looked down, biting her lip as she processed his words. He could see the struggle in her. She wanted to believe him, to surrender to the love that was blossoming between them, but the fears and doubts that had been festering in her mind were not so easily dismissed. "I'm scared, Richard," she finally admitted, her voice shaking. "Scared of what this means for us, scared of the judgment and the whispers. I don't want to be the punchline of a cruel joke." He reached out, taking her hands in his, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "You won't be. I'll fight for you. For us. I'll protect what we have. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" For a moment, silence enveloped them, the weight of the world pressing down on their shoulders. She searched his eyes, looking for the sincerity that he hoped she would find. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Okay, I'll try." With that, Richard closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a passionate kiss that spoke of longing and promise. The world around them faded, leaving only the two of them in that moment, suspended in time. It was a kiss that melted away their fears, if only for a heartbeat. But reality came crashing back as Sarah pulled away, her expression clouding once more. "Richard, Before she could finish, the door swung open and Claire stepped into the room, her presence instantly chilling the air. "Well, well, what do we have here?" she purred, her eyes darting between them, a smug smile curling her lips. "Caught in a moment of weakness, were we?" Richard's heart sank as he turned to face Claire, the woman who had once been an integral part of his life, now a looming shadow over everything he cared about. "Claire, this isn't what it looks like," he began, but she cut him off. "Oh, but it is, Richard. It's exactly what it looks like," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're in love with the help. How quaint. I would have thought you had better taste." "Get out," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't belong here." "And yet, here I am," Claire replied, her eyes glinting with malice. "I just thought I'd remind you, darling, that people are talking. They're saying things about her, about you. You really think this little fling won't tarnish your reputation? You're better than this." "Leave her out of this," Richard snapped, anger boiling beneath the surface. "Sarah is not a fling. She's someone I care about, someone I want in my life." "Oh, please," Claire laughed, the sound mocking. "You think your elite friends will stand by you when they find out you're dating a maid? They'll have a field day. You're risking everything for... What? A romantic fantasy?" Richard turned to Sarah, seeing the hurt reflected in her eyes, and it pierced him like a dagger. "Don't listen to her," he urged, but Claire continued her assault. "Richard, you're a successful businessman. You're supposed to date women who can keep up with you, not someone who cleans up after them. You'll end up humiliated and she'll end up heartbroken when she realizes she can't fit into your world." "Enough!" Richard shouted, his patience wearing thin. "You're the one who doesn't fit into my life anymore, Claire. I won't let you use your influence to manipulate me or Sarah." Claire smirked, clearly enjoying the chaos she was creating. "You think you can defend her against the world? Good luck with that. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about your little romance. Just wait and see how quickly your life falls apart." With that, she turned on her heel and left the room, closing the door behind her with a finality that echoed in Richard's chest. He turned back to Sarah, who was staring at the floor, her face pale and stricken. "Sarah, I can't," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I can't do this. I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart. I can't be the target of your enemies, Richard. I'm not strong enough for this." "Please," he pleaded, stepping closer. "Don't let her get to you. You're stronger than you think." "But I feel so small in this world," she confessed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't take the judgment, the whispers. I don't want to be the subject of gossip and scorn. It's too much." "Sarah, please," he begged, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. "I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." But she shook her head, stepping back, creating distance between them once more. "I think it's best if we end this. It's for the best, Richard. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." "Don't say that," he urged, desperation flooding his voice. "You're not a burden. You're my choice." "I can't be your choice in a world that won't accept me," she replied, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry." His heart shattered as the finality of her words sank in. "Sarah, don't—" But she turned away, walking toward the door, her shoulders trembling with emotion. "I'll always care about you, Richard, but I can't do this. I need to go." As she opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, Richard felt a part of himself break away, lost forever in the space between them. "Sarah!" he called. Richard Blake sat at his expansive mahogany desk, the glow of multiple screens reflecting off his glasses. The high-rise office, with its breathtaking view of the city skyline, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. Days had turned into weeks since Sarah Mitchell had walked out of his life, and no matter how hard he focused on business, her absence loomed large in his heart. He could still recall every laugh, every shared secret, and the way her eyes sparkled with an innocent joy that felt worlds away from his corporate reality. "Richard, are you with us?" His colleague, Mark, snapped him back to the present, a bemused look on his face. "You've been zoning out during all the meetings this week. Something on your mind?" Richard forced a smile, attempting to mask the turmoil within. "Just a lot of work to handle. You know how it is. Mark raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. Sure, just be careful not to let it consume you. You're not a machine. Machine or not, Richard couldn't shake the memories of Sarah. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the kindness in her voice when she spoke about her family, her dreams and her struggles. He missed her laughter ringing through the hotel halls, disrupting the monotony of his high-powered life. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own battles. The days felt long and repetitive as she returned to her job at the hotel, each room she cleaned a reminder of the life she had nearly stepped into with Richard. She tried to put on a brave face for her co-workers, but the whispers of doubt and the judgmental glances from friends weighed heavily on her heart. They didn't understand. They couldn't possibly know how deeply she had felt for him, nor how much she yearned for a life beyond the confines of the hotel. "Sarah," called out her friend Lisa, as they took a break in the staff lounge. "You've been so quiet lately. What's going on? You can talk to me." Sarah hesitated, biting her lip. "It's nothing, really. Just thinking." "Thinking about that guy, the one from the gala?" Lisa pressed, her eyes narrowing. "You know he's not worth your time, right? He's a millionaire. You're just a maid." Sarah felt a sharp pang in her chest at Lisa's words. "That's not fair. He treated me like a person, not just a maid. You didn't see how he looked at me." "Yeah, well, that was just a phase. Rich guys don't settle down with girls like us," Lisa retorted, crossing her arms. "You need to focus on your life here." As Lisa walked away, Sarah felt the weight of her friend's words settle heavily on her shoulders. She had thought about Richard every day, every moment since they had parted. It was hard to forget someone who had made her feel special, who had seen her as more than just a hotel employee. But what was the point in dreaming of a life that seemed utterly unattainable? Across town, Richard's frustration brewed. He was tired of pretending everything was fine, of wearing a mask of indifference while his heart ached for Sarah. It was during a late-night meeting that everything changed. As he discussed the fallout from the rumors surrounding Sarah, a realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. "Claire," he shouted, the name echoing through the boardroom. His colleagues paused, surprised by his sudden outburst. "She was behind the rumors. I know it." "What are you talking about?" Mark asked, looking confused. Richard's mind raced with the memories of Claire's petty jealousy and the way she had always looked at Sarah with disdain. "She's been spreading lies about Sarah to undermine her. I have to confront her." Without waiting for a response, Richard stormed out of the conference room, his heart pounding with purpose. He had to make things right, to fight for the woman who had shown him what life was beyond the walls of his wealth. Arriving at Claire's office, he found her lounging in a chair, scrolling through her phone. The sight ignited his anger further. "We need to talk," he said, voice steady but filled with emotion. Claire looked up, feigning innocence. "Oh, Richard, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the act, Claire," he snapped. "I know you were behind the rumors about Sarah. You thought you could ruin her life because you're jealous." Claire leaned back, crossing her legs with a smirk. "And what if I was? You really think that girl is good enough for you? You're a CEO, Richard. You belong with someone who matches your status." "Someone like you?" he shot back, his voice rising. "You don't get it, do you? Sarah is everything you're not. She's genuine, hard-working, and she's the only person who's ever made me feel alive. I won't let you destroy her because of your jealousy." Claire's expression shifted, her smile fading. "You're making a mistake, Richard. You'll regret choosing her." "I'd rather regret loving her than live a life that's empty without her," Richard declared, the fire in his heart igniting a newfound determination. "I'm exposing you for what you are. I'll tell everyone the truth." With those words, he turned on his heel and left, feeling a rush of adrenaline and clarity. He would not allow Claire's deceit to dictate his life or Sarah's future. The following day, Richard took decisive action. He called an emergency meeting with his team, prepared to lay bare the truth about Claire's manipulations. As he stood before his colleagues, he felt a mix of fear and empowerment. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice steady. "I have something important to address. Recently, there have been rumors circulating about Sarah Mitchell, and I want to make it clear that they are unfounded and malicious. Gasps echoed in the room, and he could see Claire's face turning pale. These rumours were fueled by jealousy from within our own ranks, he continued, locking eyes with Claire. I won't stand by while someone I care about is attacked. I'm here to defend her. Claire opened her mouth to protest, but Richard cut her off. This is not about her, it's about integrity, honesty, and supporting those we love. I will not let anyone tear down a person's reputation for personal gain. The room was silent as his colleagues absorbed his words. The tension was palpable, but Richard felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he finished. I care deeply for Sarah, and I will fight for her. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. As he left the meeting, he felt invigorated, but his heart raced with anticipation. Now he had to find Sarah. He had to tell her everything, to confess his love and show her that he was ready to fight for their relationship against all odds. He rushed to the hotel where Sarah was diligently working. The familiar scent of cleaning supplies and the soft hum of the bustling hotel enveloped him, grounding him in the moment. He spotted her in the hallway, her head down, pushing a cart filled with linens. Sarah, he called, his voice breaking through the noise of the hotel. She looked up, surprise etched on her face. Richard, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He approached her, breathless with urgency. I need to talk to you. It's important. Is this about Claire? She asked cautiously, her expression shifting from surprise to apprehension. Yes, he replied, taking her hands in his. I found out that she was behind the rumors. She tried to ruin you because of her jealousy, but I won't let her do that. I stood up for you. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, her heart racing. You did that for me? I love you, Sarah, Richard confessed, his voice earnest. I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me want to be better, to be real. I don't care about the differences in our worlds. I want to build a life with you, not just live in a bubble of privilege. The tension between them shifted, and Sarah felt a warmth spread through her. But what about your friends? Your world? I don't care about their opinions, he said firmly. What matters is us. Will you give us another chance? I'm ready to face whatever comes our way, as long as you're by my side. As the truth of his words settled in, Sarah felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. I want to believe you, Richard. I really do. Then believe me, he whispered, leaning closer, his eyes filled with sincerity. Let's face this together. In that moment, Sarah stepped closer, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like home. I'm so sorry for everything, she murmured against his shoulder. I just didn't want to be a burden to you. You could never be a burden, Richard replied, holding her tightly. You're my everything. As they stood together, united against the odds, they both knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but with love as their foundation, they were ready to face whatever life threw their way, hand in hand, heart in heart.